over 200 members of Congress asked the Supreme Court to reconsider Roe versus Wade. 39 senators and 168 members of the House signed the amicus brief last week for the upcoming Supreme Court case G versus June Medical Services. That case is over a Louisiana law requiring abortion centers meet the same safety standards as those of other ambulatory surgical centers. The lawmakers argued Louisiana's safety regulations on abortion centers are constitutional, and the court should, quote, uphold the decision that kept the regulations in place. The members of Congress also called the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, which legalized abortion nationwide, quote, unworkable. They asked the court to, quote, again take up the issue of whether Roe and Casey should be reconsidered and, if appropriate, overruled. Joining us now from Capitol Hill is one of the lawmakers who signed onto this amicus brief, Representative Greg Murphy of North Carolina. Congressman, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. First off, why did you decide to sign onto this amicus brief?
Well, I think it's important when you're dealing with the issue of abortion. We're talking about the life of a child as the primary issue here, but we're also needing to talk about the life, the safety and welfare of the mother. And where we have an instance where abortions, while still sorrowfully legal in this country, we have to worry about what happens to the mother during this, what is truly a surgical procedure. And being able to have access to emergent medical care and resuscitation is altogether the right thing to do. And I think it's important that states require that for institutions and for facilities that actually do abortions. So I think the Louisiana issue is a strong issue. I actually dealt with some of this back when I was a state legislator when we were dealing with birthing centers for the same issue. When there's a delivery of a child or any of those things that go along with childbirth, there needs to be some access, readily accessed medical care at a higher level. And it's altogether the right thing to do for the safety of the mother.
And to that point, Congressman, how could the Supreme Court ruling on G versus June Medical Services potentially impact pro-life laws across the nation? What do you think our viewers need to know?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we're not going to be deterred in our stance against abortion. And while abortion is still, as I said, sorrowfully legal in this country, we have to worry about the ramifications and the safety of the mother during this surgical procedure. Getting rid of abortion and overturning Roe versus Wade is one issue, but in the meanwhile, we have to look at not only the safety and health and welfare of the child, but we have to look at it for the mother's viewpoint also.
The House of Representatives remains under Democratic control with Representative Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. Congressman, in your opinion, will there be any opportunities to pass pro-life legislation in 2020?
Well, as long as Speaker Pelosi is the Speaker right now, I think our chances will be challenged to do this, but nonetheless, we're not going to be deterred. We know the importance of the meaning of life and the sanctity of life and the safety and welfare of the mother and the child, and we're not going to be deterred about whether things are going to pass or not, because we have a mission and we have to work on accomplishing it.
Congressman, while we have you here this week, Planned Parenthood released their annual report revealing an uptick in abortion since last year and a continued steep decline of non-abortion related services. Will this, you think, renew efforts to defund Planned Parenthood of their nearly $500 million of federal funding?
Well, I hope so. Last year, close to 346,000 abortions were performed in the United States. What a tragedy. That's 10,000 more than the year before and 10,000 the year before. Disproportionately with African Americans and minorities. And so we have a national tragedy. We have a true national tragedy, and it's something that I think is a great sorrow for this nation, and that is something that we really need to come to grips with and try to reverse the horrible tragedy that's going on in this country.
And finally, Congressman, this is your first time on our program, and you yourself are Catholic. How does your Catholic faith guide your work in Congress and on this issue of life?
Well, as a Catholic, as a Christian, I truly believe that our life is given to us by God and by our Creator. We have no reason that human life should be ever taken in doubt. It believes, in my opinion, granted by the Holy Spirit, and begins at conception. And it is one of the true greatest gifts that we're given by God. And so we have to work on keeping that sacred in our life, not only in our religious life, but really in our secular life. And so it will craft me in legislation that I work towards and which I sponsor and believe in. But it's really, we're dealing with a basic issue here, that life starts at conception. And we have to do all that we can to preserve it.
Representative Greg Murphy of North Carolina, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. God bless.
And joining us now for a pro-life reaction in our DC studio is Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List. Marjorie, thank you for being here.
Oh, I've missed you. I'm so happy to be here.
It's so good to see you. Okay, over 200 members of Congress signed onto this amicus brief in defense of Louisiana's pro-life law. Is this going to have any impact on the Supreme Court ruling? I mean, the legislative branch has no power over the judicial branch.
Yes, it's actually a common practice that the court will listen to the opinions of legislators, especially if those legislators think that the court has overtaken some of their power. And in this case, there's no question that that's the case, because the argument that they're making is that the courts have prevented the state of Louisiana from protecting in the law women's health. And that is certainly the prerogative of state legislators anywhere and everywhere. So it's a great thing for the Congress, the federal legislative body, to be making that argument.
Is there any potential to overturn Roe v. Wade? What do you think?
I think it's highly, highly unlikely in this particular one. I think there's some interesting and important things that will be examined. One is really could be real ground shaking, and that is that it's the question of standing. Does Planned Parenthood have the standing to argue on behalf of women what their health is when they're arguing in specific detail about why they won't abide by legislative standards for women's health? So do they have standing in this case to argue for women? We think absolutely not, and that is a really strong argument. And say they don't have standing to do that. That means all future cases will be affected potentially by that. Does Planned Parenthood have standing to challenge other laws that, of course, maybe? So then they have to find other people to do their bidding for them.
That's incredible. And your group, the Susan B. Anthony List, also filed an amicus brief in this case. What do you hope, Marjorie, the justices keep in mind as they put out their ruling?
Well, it's very much like what I was just saying, that the health and safety of women should be protected. It is the prerogative of legislators to make sure that they do that. That the Planned Parenthood and all abortionists have shown themselves impossible, unwilling to monitor their own behavior. All the horrible situations that we know about, from Klopfer in Indiana, Gosnell in Pennsylvania, those are just the high-profile examples. But day after day, we and other organizations monitor what's going on in abortion clinics across the country, and it is a horrific horror story that when we will look back, we'll say, why in the world did we let that happen? That's what we want them to listen to, and that the idea that somehow having admitting privileges at a hospital close by is an unreasonable thing is outrageous.
Marjorie, here we are now at the beginning of a new year. As a top pro-life leader yourself, what do you think the top pro-life legislative goals need to be in 2020?
Well, I think really the two most important things are this. There's no question that confirming judges that the Trump himself nominates for all the courts, certainly if we have a Supreme Court nomination, but all federal courts, that is the top priority. Now, that's not a piece of legislation, but it's the top job of the U.S. Senate to do that. We need to stay focused on that. We need to make sure we know what judges are being considered and confirmed. Otherwise, the most important legislation that's happening right now is in the states, in the area of late-term abortion, in the area of where this Louisiana law is, and protecting the health of women, and several other areas where there may be discrimination laws in terms of Down's children and others, and laws against aborting them just because of that. Any one of those three or several others may be the case that would potentially go after and potentially be the impetus for overturning Roe. So that state legislation is really important, and we're very focused on that.
So there's a lot to keep our eye on. And finally, Marjorie, I want to get your reaction to another top story this week. We'll have much more in depth next week, but this week, Planned Parenthood released their annual report revealing yet again another increase in the amount of abortions. What do you think? What are your initial reactions looking at these numbers from this report, and what does it indicate about nation's largest abortion business?
Well, It indicates a couple of things. First, that their trajectory is the same, that they continue to overtake the abortion market share. Right now, they do 40% of abortions in this country every year. That is a constant increase. And as that market share increases, their services directly to women that are actually health services, not abortions, decrease every year. They're consolidating their power. They're actually kind of buying up the mom and shop abortion clinics so that they're like the Kmart, the Walmart of abortion now. On the other hand, we can see that what President Trump and our allies and legislatures across the country want to do, which is to take away their funding, is absolutely the right thing to do. For the first time ever, they don't receive Title X funding, that federal funding that's the second biggest source for their funding. That's finally gone. But means honestly, if we have to re-elect this president, or that funding will go right back, it means that we need to keep on that track. What we really need to do is stop every abortion. That's what we have to do. And then the whole idea of federal funding of it is a moot point. But in the meantime, it's time to stop that flood of money to Planned Parenthood.
Absolutely. And like I said, we'll continue to dig into those numbers. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Catherine.